K.G. Subramanyam is 90, but his art has not aged. Long after his contemporaries have bowed out, he still occupies the center stage, and he continues to produce art that is both contemporary and relevant. To say that he is an artist would be to say half the truth. He is also a perceptive writer, a very serious thinker about issues of art, and a very influential teacher. He has inspired 3 generations of Indian artists, and many of whom are here today to celebrate this occasion. If one looks at his recent work, one notices that the primary mood in all these works is that of celebration of life and celebration of nature. But when one looks closer into them, behind the efflorescence of color and the proliferation of forms and transmutations of images, which are so playful, there are also occasionally shadows of darkness, shadows of suffering, and deeper thoughts about the way society sometimes behaves, the way human beings reacts violently towards other human beings. But all this is like a subtext to the celebration of life and nature.
Manida, I've often wondered how all these travels through cultures and places that you've made through your life as a Tamil Brahmin in Kerala, from there to Mahe, to Madras, to Shantiniketan, to Baroda, and so very different places with completely different histories and cultures. How have they layered their ways into your art? The sheer variety of your work, the range of the images, the colors, the shades, they're so varied that sometimes I wonder if they come from all these experiences where you walked in and walked out, never really becoming a part of them. And maybe even your slight distancing, the attitude you take, your wit, your sense of fun, you're never lost in those
That's
cultures.
A person's growth is to a certain extent conditioned by the environment he grows in. It is also conditioned by the kind of a fight that he has with the environment, in a way. So there are things you accept and that there are things that you reject. And this has happened everywhere. In fact, when my family was devout in a certain sense, Tamil Brahmin, but I was all the time from childhood revolting against it because I didn't like the look of the temples. All around there were beggars, all around there was some kind of filth. There was good sculpture, but there was bad sort of visions
Human
of
living.
humanity. Yeah. Now, so from the early times I had a sort of a… I rejected this kind of a thing. Then later when I grew up and I had some exposure to atheistic thought and things of that kind, I found that is where I belonged, not here. I mean, if at all we had all these things, they were part of a culture which believed in filling an absence with so many things. This is kind of a thing. And that idea has grown up with me throughout, that what we call culture is one way of gilding ourselves a kind of a world that we want, as against the world that we live in, with its contradictions. And we want a sort of a world in which probably we can have beauty, we can have a kind of a commonality of interest and things of that kind. But then the whole idea is that it's an effort, and that is what makes us human beings. We don't subject ourselves to what is, we try to make something out of it. So for an artist, that's a very important thing. Every morning when I get up and I see the light breaking through the windows, I generally get up with a certain kind of an exhilaration that there is a world like that the sunlight is so beautiful and so invigorating, the flowers are so brilliant. I may be aging, but my appetite is not. My appetite for the world, for enjoying the world, for making something out of the world, or looking at the world itself, is not
Exhausted.
any weaker. This kind of… Well, really, that is probably what happens. As you grow old, you may age, but then there are certain powers within you which are ageless, I mean, which is sort of a continue burning. I know, physically you may, but then mentally you may not.
Manida, over the years of your work, at different points of time, you have developed certain special mediums, taking on an old technique but giving it your own quality to it, even technically. not just in the expression of it. Would you be able to recall or share with us some of the points when you choose a particular different medium, when you make a departure, a conscious departure?
Really, all this happened not by plan. It happened by chance. In fact, when I came to Shantiniketan and came to understand the ideas of Nandalal Bose, Master Mosai, where he wants to throw open art practice to cover the whole panorama. That is not only studio art, but the art in the villages, handicraft, all these things together. That tied up with my idea of what a tradition meant, which I had already started thinking in terms of after reading Kumaraswamy's Medieval Sinhalila. So the question was now, if there is a tradition which has a multiplicity of creative outlets, then there should be a reason why that multiplicity should remain or not remain. In fact, historically in certain places, people were afraid of multiplicity at a certain time. But in my case, I wanted to know what happens, why do people do these things differently? Then I found that this multiplicity is like the opening up of different languages of expression. How did I get to work with terracottas, for instance? Well, we had this art fair in Baroda at one time. And for that I made various kinds of things, which are like toys or little figurines and things of that kind with terracotta. And then while handling terracotta, I found the way the early artists of Manjadaro or something handled terracotta with the pressure of the hand or with the mark with the fingers, fingertips and things of that kind, was almost non-existent in the sculptor studios. So, then when you sort of made a clay flat sort of
Cabinet.
and then you put it over a sort of a internal structure, then it looked like a body. Now, then I came to know that clay has a language of its own. Now, if you have the kind of the ability to do it, we can bring out the language and it can say. And it happened this way. At that time, we had a big flood in Baroda, and certain villages were very badly affected. And there were bodies strewn around, and we went trying to help people. Then I found these bloated bodies. Then I made a series of studies of bodies like that. So in fact, one of those things was quite well known, that sunrise over Tarsali kind of. That happened that way, naturally. Of course, later, when I got a chance to do a big mural, I used the terracotta medium. And that was luck.
Manita, this morning we'll be talking about your Shantiniketan story. So maybe the first thing, how and when and why did you come to Shantiniketan in the first place in 1944?
That's right. Well, it's a two-sided story. On one side, I had known about the Shantiniketan experiment of Tagore, even when I was a student in school, and always dreamt that I would like to be in an institution like that. I never hoped I would be. It was too far, and it was a strange part of this continent. But then things led to it that I was forced to be there. It is partly due to my kind of involvement as student activist in Shantini, in
Madras.
in Madras. And Quit India movement came handy, so I could shout around and do something and make a mark. Anyway, we made a noise in the beginning, then after that the movement lost color, and then we used to meet and wanted to find out which are all the other ways the way. There were some youngsters who wanted to have something violent going, but then many of us did not want that to happen. So finally in 1943, we sort of went and picketed the sort of government office, the secretariat. So we were sort of caught, we were put in the penitentiary for then tried, and we got various kinds of sentences. Some of us, like me, got 6 months in prison, and the others a little less, 3. The prison experience was an interesting thing, in that there were a number of us from the colleges and the academic institutions who wanted to discuss ideas. And there were a number of people who came from the group who wanted to be in positions of power. And there were some who sort of strayed into the movement from here and there, and some of them were quite interesting people. And I more or less knew at that time that when India becomes independent, I would rather be associated with not the politics of India, but its reconstruction. But in the meanwhile, my talent to paint came up, and so I used to sit at home and do these things. And my brother thought that I should be somewhere where I can really grow. So he knew that I was interested in Shantiniketan, and he also knew that I could not get into any government institution because there was a ban. So he wrote, without telling me, to Nandalal Bose. And suddenly, one day in February, I got a telegram from Nandalal Bose, "Come here quickly." And that is how I started for my trip north, first trip north. Well, I was really exhilarated to be called, because I always thought that Nandalal was a great artist. But I later found that he was a great artist and a teacher.
Manida, it was 1944 in Shantiniketan, 3 years after the death of Rabindranath. How did you find Shantiniketan? Signs of the conventions, the ceremonies, the lifestyle that Rabindranath had initiated? And was there also sort of a reverence and a fear and an awe, the beginning of the conservatism, to conserve Tagore rather than build upon that? What were the signs 3 years after Rabindranath's death?
Really, as soon as I landed in Shantiniketan, the feeling was one of, as I said, exhilaration. In fact, it was a sort of a new place for me. Even the look of the place was new. Shantiniketan, the landscape the people around, even the animals, they all looked a little smaller than what I was used to in lush Kerala.
Okay.
Yes. The trees had much less girth. Even the goats were much smaller than the goats that I had seen. And so, from a kind of natural prolificity, you come to a place of monastic simplicity kind of a thing. In a sense, I liked it. In fact, it was some place that I was looked for because Tagore always used to talk about a tapovan. So maybe this was a tapovan of some sort. And then there was a certain amount of what you call a kind of a quietude in the whole place. And that quietude was something that you could think in terms of what the sort of a pious Buddhist wanted. I mean, I have heard about a story where the Buddhist priests used to take their sort of novices early in the morning to a lotus pond to hear the lotus buds open, to hear the lotus buds open.
So there's a cultivation of sensitivity.
That's right. That's
You
right.
nurture sensitivity.
All that was there. So I was deeply sort of pleased about coming there. And the community itself did not look like a school where you are made to sit in a class or people lecture to you. There was sort of an interaction between the teacher and the students, which was informal. And most of the interaction did not even take place in the studio. It took place in the tea shop and things like that. All that was quite new and something which I looked for. The question you put me slowly dawned on me during the 3 years or 3.5 years I was a student there. I suddenly found that Tagore's disappearance from the scene, the institution had almost lost its backbone. Most people who were there, especially the people in the administration, were always talking about money. How can we keep this going? And they wanted to go to whatever extent they could. This, that, that. But then all the same, Kalabhavan was what Kalabhavan was. Nandalal was there. And then he had his two brilliant associates, Vinod Bihari and Ram Kinkar. And there was an informal atmosphere. So I enjoyed being there for the next 3 years. All this kind of grumbling and other things behind the scene, we were not affected by it.
Manida, we were talking about how an artist contributes to an environment, works in, within, around, and into the environment creatively. And this side, the Kala Bhavan, and its surroundings, they have had a history, and the artist creating an environment to be shared by practicing artists, by students, by teachers. So there is a history behind it, and at one point you see the history in the making when you come here as a student, and when you come back here as a teacher, you contribute to that history and add to that history.
Really, as far as I can remember, an attempt at mediating between the artist and the viewing public was started by Abanindranath himself. Of course, he had the kind of an idea that the artist should probably sit on the village street and make things like the old patuas. And Nandalal took him seriously. So he went and made drawings sitting on the village street, then put them for sale at the prices the village putts were selling. Then apparently Abanindranath thought he had told a little too much. And he thought this was too valuable to be left to that kind of a public, so he bought it all himself. Then it struck them that another better and probably more lasting way of mediating between the public and the artist will be to put art on lasting buildings and in the environment. So as soon as Shantiniketan started growing and having its little houses here and there, they tried to sort of put art on the buildings that were coming up. One of the early things which are still lasting are Nandalal's murals on what at one time was the library building, but now is the Pata Bhavan building. And done with the help of a Rajasthani Arayas craftsman. And that is one of his masterpieces. Similarly, when Shamali Badi came at Tagore's behest, it had sculpture on that mud building done by Nandalal and his students, and particularly Ram Kinkar, who was then a young artist here. Then, of course, in I think around 1936, the color body came into being. They got very enthusiastic and they thought they would cover a whole building with sculpture. I found that I wanted to do external murals with quasi-sculptural kind of media, and if possible, sort of with various kinds of new found media that you can use, so that they were weather-resistant, hard, and things of that kind. In fact, the Black House in Shantiniketan was a thing that put all these ideas into your head, though it was very hard to keep because it was mud-made.
So it was a daily reference point in a way.
That's right, that's right. So really speaking, to a certain extent, Shantiniketan sort of showed you more or less how art can go into the environment. That is why I did the black and white first mural on the A building, which is at the corner of the whole campus. I was a little sort of unhappy and probably happy about what my friend Timothy Hyman wrote about this campus, saying that though the Shantiniketan campus is more or less a museum of the early development of modern Indian art, its buildings were very ordinary looking. And it certainly were, and Kalabhavan buildings especially. So I thought probably you should put something there which was eye-catching. And that's why I thought in terms of black and white mural on the whole building here. It worked rather well, but it didn't stand long because it was done with very ordinary materials. After about 6 years, it started running. Then after about 12, it started disappearing. And then finally people came and asked me, can we touch these things up, or can you sort of help us to do it again? So I said I would rather do a new mural rather than touch it up. So they scrapped the whole building, and the mural that is in front of you is what is. After I did this, then a certain section of the Shantiniketan public thought that Nandalal's studio was going into disrepair, and it will probably look even worse than it looks now. So, can you do something about it? Well, I owed it to Nandalal to do something on it. I mean, in my heart of hearts. But I wanted the local sanction for that. Well, the general public thought that it would be worthwhile I did. When I did the mural, I knew that I had to cover the surface with something which harked back to Nandalal's ideas about it. So I wanted that it should look a little like a mud building, though it had to be done in ceramic tiles to make it lasting. Luckily, I found ceramic tiles in a factory nearby which had the same kind of color. So over that, I worked with white, like generally in the villages, people work with white on mud surface. Except that the motives are not exactly what the village motives. But I wanted it to look a little like something which carried the reflection of the landscape around rather than the human life around. So that is how the whole thing came up. I would think that eventually Nandalal Studio would become the brain center of this institution. Well, I hope it is a sort of a justified hope.
Manida, as we're talking about the murals, I think your first major involvement with a mural was the Hindi Bhavan mural of Vinod Bihari.
When Hindi Bhavan mural was being talked about, I was not fully aware of the various things that went behind it at that time. I now am, now. Largely because I have been trying to find out the nature of Vishwabharati itself. In fact, last time I talked in the Vishwabharati, when they felicitated me, was to pinpoint to the fact that I consider that Vishwabharati was conceived by Tagore as an education center for peace. After going through the banalities and the sort of brutalities of the two world wars, he probably thought that we will have to begin a new kind of human being who is educated about how to live together with his fellow men. And I think Vishwabharati's main purpose was that, at least, probably controlling the various brutal confrontations.
The aggressive drives, they were controlled and held back.
Now, it was only proper that in an institution like the Vishwabharati, Hindi Bhavan should have a major focus on this kind of study. And then a mural that was conceived should also have a major focus on this problem. And really speaking, it is in this context that Vinod Bihari thought about the whole thing of our religious thinking in the whole of India and made that mural. Of course, he wanted to cover all the four walls, but they were not available, so only the three walls. Like a sort of a running stream.
And also a surround for the space.
So, he starts first with the beginning of religious thought, where people are talking about a higher reality and the nature of higher reality, whether it is single or double or multiple, things of that kind. Then the great teachers who come and sort of on one side they exalt sort of a worship, on another side they exalt sort of cerebral analysis. So on one side Shankara, on one side Ramanuja. Then this whole thought that gets mixed up with the general stream of popular thinking. So there are people who are craftsmen, who are farmers, who are sort of wandering minstrels. They are all trying their own interpretation of this whole thing. It's sort of a great concept when you think in terms of it. Like he thought in terms of village life clustering round a pukur. Now here he thought in terms of the whole religious tradition trying to fold like a big river. This sort of thing. I was lucky to work with him in the last stages. In the early stages, I was not there. It is only in the last stages, in the third wall, that I worked. Luckily, he allowed me to do a few small pieces here and there. And I learned more about art in that 1 year or less than 1 year of working with him than in all the other years. It was a great way sort of opening up.
হরি নামের সুধা পান করিয়া মত্ত থাকি সর্বদাই আমি কাঙাল দয়াল গুরু আমার মন তো কাঙাল নয় নামের সুধা পান করিয়া নামের সুধা পান করিয়া মত্ত থাকি সর্বদাই আমি কাঙাল দয়াল গুরু আমার মন তো কাঙাল নয় যে যা মনে আশা করে দয়াল গুরু তার পূর্ণ করে যে যা মনে আশা করে দয়াল গুরু তার পূর্ণ করে যদি ভক্তি তার থাকে তবে রে ফল নইলে বিফল তবে রে ফল নইলে বিফল যদি গুরুর কৃপা হয় আমি কাঙাল দয়াল গুরু আমার মন তো কাঙাল নয় নামের সুধা পান করিয়া নামের সুধা পান করিয়া মত্ত থাকি সর্বদাই আমি কাঙাল দয়াল গুরু আমার মন তো কাঙাল নয়
Nandalal really had done a lot of thinking about a sort of a new way of teaching art for the Indian student. And to a certain extent today, I think I find it is relevant to the world scene as well. So he used another simile to sort of express what he thought about art. That is certainly when each artist grows in a way like each pot that potter makes takes its own kind of a shape. But then before that, a potter has to get the wheel into motion and get it steady. It is after only that wheel gets steady that you can grow. Getting the wheel steady itself means that you have to analyze various kinds of art. How are they grown? At what level do they get steady and all? I mean, this is something that he sort of tried to do. So Nandalal may not have written all the little things that he wrote about art in modernistic language. But he makes out a statement saying that first thing is that each work of art has a basis in each kind of response of an artist to surroundings. And in each kind of response has its own kind of means of trying to put it on there. And you will have to find this out, and this is not the same everywhere. That was a great thing. I mean, it was something which affected the whole global scene. I mean, You're not thinking in terms of you are thinking in terms of art as is and the basic language of art, how it grows, things like that. We might not have realized it fully when we were students. That is why I have written somewhere that a good teacher grows with you. I mean, you never sort of realize what he has taught you.
Anita, a little bit about the history of Baroda and how the artistic setting came into being with the patronage of the family, of the royal family, bringing in Nandalal at one point,
That's right.
even the beginning of this art college, all these somehow growing out of that old culture.
Really speaking, when I first came to Baroda, I suddenly realized that there was some kind of a connection between Bengal and Baroda. First of all, I suddenly discovered this place had the same kind of saptaparni trees. Then there were Talgats, of course. Then Kamini. Then various other things which I was familiar with in Shantiniketan, I found them there. Then, of course, I came to know that, well, this is the place where Nandalal did his major mural project in what is called the Kirti Mandir. That's a kind of construction where every generation of rulers of Baroda left their pagadis and costumes there for other people to see. The Sahajirao Maharaja was a very special person for Baroda. That is Sahajirao III. Now, Sahajirao was a very interesting man, as I hear. He was one man who made various enactments in this state, which was much ahead of whatever the British government did in its own time. With regard to education of young people, with regard to medical attention to people, traveling libraries. And then he was a benefactor of every cultural activity happening at that time. The first piece done here by Nandalal in the Kirti Mandir is 1939. So the Maharaja thought that we should have Nandalal do something here. And then he commissioned him to do 4 murals within that building. And they are really some of the finest things that Nandalal has done. When I came here first to Baroda, I was so happy to come to the place which carried Nandalal's murals. It's a wonderful thing. I mean, many people don't know it. People in Baroda itself don't know it. When I came here, of course, the circumstances that made me come here were very curious. Well, I was here at the time of the growth of the institution. And like you said, I had a small role in shaping the kind of ideas that went into its basic structure
In Baroda.
in Baroda. But I was a junior staff member at that time. And the Baroda was an institution that came up as the only art department in a traditional university that took up art training seriously and wanted to sort of measure itself against similar institutions in the other parts of the world. Luckily, it could do it because it had the support of Hansa Mehta.
The Vice Chancellor.
And Hansa Mehta was a widely cultivated woman who had seen the rest of the world and who wanted this institution to bring in sort of a kind of approach between professionalism and the vocation kind of this sort of. So, you are not a market-oriented artist, you are an artist who is answering your own need, but then, well, you should also know what is around and what you want to say, and you might have certain kind of a purposiveness when you sort of do it. Well, when I came here, luckily for me, there were two other colleagues who had a Shantiniketan experience. The person who attracted me here was Shankar Chowdhury, who was a senior student in Kalaban at one time and was my old friend. Then there was Bendre, who had visited Shantiniketan when I was a student in the second year. Bendre was an interesting man. He had already made his name on the Bombay scene. So, when we all got there was a certain amount of community of interest in developing the institution, keeping it as open as we could, and doing away with the normal kind of tests and examination that streamlined the products of the institution. It was good. In fact, the first 20 years I spent here, I enjoyed it as much as I did my time in Shantiniketan.
When did this come up and when did you do that mural?
That was just before I left this place for Bombay. Then by that time we had a mural technician called Gyarasalal Mistry. He was very anxious to do something. So I said, we will do something like a sort of an engraving. Well, it became a little more rigid than I wanted it to be, but then I did it. And now it has remained. And now when I look at it after so many years, it doesn't look too bad. Luckily this surface has remained as it was, more or less.
Quite well.
Very well, 1965 to now.
Completed in 65. 48 years.
That's right. So, and even the thing below, though a few things have got broken, but it is in fairly good shape. My senior colleague, head of the department, Mr. Bendre, wanted that I should do something on the painting studio's walls. So I was thinking, what do I put on a painting studio's walls, which will symbolize, let's say, the philosophy of education or its process. There is a Tagore poem which says that any amount of coaxing cannot open a bud. What will open is the first ray of the sun. So I thought that would be the ideal way of what education should be. So I visualized it like a sort of an abstract sun on the upper part of the wall and a kind of a lotus pond below with so many things happening. We started the fair here to make it a kind of a bridge between the institution and the public.
This was in 62.
I think so. That is as far as I remember. And then we got the university's permission to do that. And it became a kind of a yearly routine after that. And then we wanted that it should go to the public. And we spent I think about 2 to 3 weeks every year working towards that and had this. And we started earning a little money. But then what we did was, it was generally sort of administered under a student welfare fund. So if a student needed monetary help for anything or the other, it will pay for it. Otherwise they didn't have any other way of. And the university fund for student welfare is very little and it gets distributed very widely. But we also did the other thing that whenever there was a national calamity or a local calamity, we donated from that for that calamity. There was the Koyana earthquake, we donated money. When there was a sort of damage to various houses and people's properties here during a sort of a communal uprise, we donated money to the people who suffered.
So the toys came out of that?
Out of that. Out of that, the toys, terracotta work, then a little bit of printing.
But for the toys, you were thinking of a larger popular public who could buy these toys and keep them?
I was not at all thinking of that, but I was wanting that students should learn how to sort of make things with very little but beautiful objects. And if the students want to meet the public that way, they can, and if the public want to. At one time, these toys were made in larger numbers by the mural technician who worked with me all through. And I had given him the permission to sell them and make his own money because he put in a lot of effort into it. And he did succeed for a while. But then I didn't have, at that time, a question of this going into the market. I didn't want to be market savvy. My interest in design and handicraft practice is related to the improvement of the trade in the sense that trade practice. That is, how can a person who make a thing for a functional, as a functional object, become somebody very near to an artist.
How did the Shoras come about?
The Shoras came about from Bengal, because Bengal have these Shoras. And then since we had a virulent Bengali here, like Shankar Chowdhury, he said, why don't you do it? So we started doing it here. And then it worked very well. And these circular things that you can put on the wall seem to be okay. And now, of course, people sort of buy those things, and sometimes we have art exhibitions which are entirely made of Shoras. And during their fair, which is now not so frequent as it used to be, there is a Shora section.
And there's a great demand for Shoras, especially his Shoras. So we really had to keep them away from the public gaze so as to add to the departmental collection.
The Shantiniketan Nandamela happened after the Baroda thing?
Yes, in a sense so. In fact, Shantiniketan old Mela used to have a sort of an art section in the early days. Then it has progressively grown into a kind of a trade Mela. So, really speaking, there is no post. We had a teacher here called Chakravarti, who went on promotion to Shantiniketan, became a professor there of sculpture. And in the first year he was serving there, I think two students were sort of teasing each other and somebody threw a sort of a axe or axe blade and it cut his vein. And in Shantiniketan, you know, he could have bled to death. So he was hurried to, Bardhaman, and then looked after, but it cost money and they didn't know where to get the money from. Then I think Ajit Chakravarti said, they have this institution, that is the Faculty of Fine Arts, Baroda, raises money for a student welfare fund, and why don't we? And that is how the Nandan Mela started. So, we had in a way roots in the old Shantiniketan tradition. Then it went back to Shantiniketan from here, in rebound. And now, since it is Nandan Mela, I am happy that it has become a sort of a yearly feature.
কেমন আছো? ভালো। রোগা হয়ে গেছে।
Here, when I was a young teacher in Shantiniketan, one of the local patrons was Nanubhai
In Baroda.
In Baroda. And he was a highly cultivated man, an MIT graduate. Whenever there was something to be done, he was always there to help. When I was going in 1954 for a year to London on a British Council research scholarship.
To Slade School.
Yeah, research scholarship. At that time, I didn't have any savings, so I had to have some kind of money to at least rig myself up in one set of woolen clothes. So anyway, he came handy. He said, why don't you do 2 murals for us? And then I did one showing their foundry and another showing the agricultural area. They still keep it very carefully. Later, at various times, he has bought a little bit of my work here and there. But then later in 1979, he commissioned me to do a very big mural in his R&D building, which is about 45 feet high, which you'll probably go and see. then I made a small mural in the, I think, entrance to their guest house, inside, on the side. So all these things they have. And they are very happy to have them.
Manida, with your interest in the mural, your passion for the mural, the first opportunity you get to do a mural on your own in a big way is at the Ravindralaya, Lucknow, in '61.
Quite. In fact, really speaking, during the Ravindra Centenary year, the various theatres were sanctioned.
Rabindra theatres all over the country.
By the time the Lucknow theatre was getting on to be, that was 1963.
Okay.
So, at that time, of course, this whole project came to me partly because of a friend of mine who was the younger brother of the chief minister of that time, Sucheta Kriplani.
Okay.
Or Sucheta Di was also my wife Sushila's teacher at one time. At that time I didn't know what kind of thing I would do, but then I wanted to cover the whole thing with terracotta. The people there were not too open to that kind of idea. They said, terracotta, it is something which will break very quickly, I think. I think that is quite true. But if you read your history books, you will find that the earliest remains anywhere in the world are potsherds, terracottas. So they last if human beings don't break it down. During the puja vacation, I did the whole mural pieces. And since I was new to the medium, I knew that a lot of pieces will get broken. So I made 4 times the number of pieces I needed and various kind of fillers. And during the summer vacation, we set it up. It was fairly planned well. And then since it is going to be a heavy mural with pieces which were, some of them were more than 6 inches thick and some of them were 4 inches thick, so like that. We used the method of putting them on the wall in the bookshelf system. That is, the whole weight doesn't come to the bottom. I mean, you had something
Frames
to support
and
that, like that. Frame.
supports.
It worked out well, and it came out. The peculiar thing is, the front wall was made first for us, and we fixed the mural on the front wall. The building came up later. The next project came with when they were having the Gandhi centenary and they were going to have the Gandhi Darshan exhibition. So I thought that that was a great thing to do something.
And also your commitment to Gandhi.
That's right.
Which is always at the
That's
back
right.
of your mind.
So I was thinking of various things, the mural with water bodies, trying to sort of reflect it and all. Then I found that water bodies are never looked after. So finally, it was a sort of 50-foot square courtyard. So I tried to put there 3 structures, which one came out of the wall, the other 2 were freestanding. The one that came out of the wall was like a sort of wheel of arms, with raised arms, where Gandhi sort of with a quotation on the top, where Gandhi gives a kind of a tribute to work and the necessity for work. And the another was something like a Kamadhenu structure. Kamadhenu, mother goddess kind of structure, with background wall having kind of a village plans and things of that kind. That carries one of Gandhi's saying that villages are invaluable for India. If the villages die, India dies. Then the third structure was a kind of a casket sort of here with various little openings there, showing the symbols of various religions. And that also carries some instructions, sort of inscriptions, which Gandhi says on one side, since we think God has many forms, we call him the formless. And since he carries many names, we call him the nameless. The idea was that there will be a small tree in the middle, a flowering tree, and it will be kept. So it will be like a terracotta courtyard. I mean, it's all done by the same method. Somebody went there to see it and found that it was used as sort of a dumping place for various things. Anyway, I know that public art always lies in danger of being misused by people who are sort of not sensitive to them.
Manita, as an artist in India, one always comes under this whole burden of tradition. Tradition, the tradition of great art, great artists, the different periods, historical periods. And then there's almost subterranean, lost, flowing tradition of the folks in different parts, their different cultures coming in. How have you as an artist responded to these, addressed these, coped with these? What has been the scene? The two traditions, the so-called artistic tradition and the so-called folk tradition, and a modern artist in between.
In fact, let me start the answer with a reference to an artist friend of mine, Somnath Hoare. Most people are familiar with his work, highly society responsive. And most of his work he termed as wounds. It focused on the suffering of people. At one time, Somnath, my friend, never wanted to get out of Shantiniketan as far as he could. Once I went to Hyderabad and he was given a prize. He was quite unwilling to go and take the prize. So I said that you will embarrass me if you don't do that. Then he went. And after he returned, he thought, it's not so bad getting out of. Then he suddenly went on a holiday to Sanchi. Then for the first time he saw the Sanchi stupa and the gateways and things of that kind. Then came back and told me in confidence, after seeing Sanchi, I wonder whether we are getting anywhere at all. Now here, he had his own sort of issues, but when you see what has happened before, there is always a desire that whatever you do should be more or less in the skyline of this world. That is what I think Abanindranath used to say in many of his lectures. What we do today may not be exactly the same thing as what other people did, and there is no point in repeating them, but then it should be in the same skyline. Now I can imagine that that happens. in a certain curious way with people who work with their hands, who handle things, who cook, who cut vegetables. Now you see all these people with sensitivity, they sort of gel up within you, and then when you see a work, you can say that is juicy, this is full, this is ripe. Now he sort of came to that kind of a conclusion, that people who work with their hands try to do some kind of artwork or things of that kind, try to express things, they will be more likely to respond to good art than the other people who hear lectures on aesthetics. Now, I remember my mother, she used to do various things, but she also was very sensitive to things. So, in our, when I was young, I remember people sort of were taking her to shops to buy things for the wedding and things of that kind, because they trusted her trade.
She had the taste.
And she did all kinds of things. She made leaf toys. And she was very particular that in the house we stayed, the floors should be clean. So the old mud floors used to stick to your perspiring backs when you slept on them. So she used to do that Jaipur kind of surface and she learnt all that. And she was very sensitive to various things, though she just knew to read and write. Thinking about this question, then I got interested in the various aspects of village arts, of people who have not been tutored to do anything, but living in a kind of a social milieu, they have learned from each other. And then there was a large presence of it in the Gujarat villages. They embroidered, they grew on the walls, and they, on occasions, with embroidery and painting on the walls, sometimes even doing kind of a relief sculpture on the walls, they made their little habitations look like they were little palaces of some kind. They were trying to, with their little skills, transform the look of things, add something to nature, which changed the whole sense of atmosphere itself. And I got interested in how they did this, and also what was the structure of the various images they made. They didn't know too much, but by little units of things that they could easily do, they built up complicated structures. And some of the structures were so fluid and active that the more learned kind of art could not sort of do such a thing. So, I came to understand that these kind of art methods that people devised in their own ignorance maybe had a certain quality which the other art didn't have. So, it was a language of its own. And that language often fed the other arts. And it worked both ways in a sort of a living tradition like India. Language comes when there is a communication between man and man. Imperfect maybe, but then some kind of communication. There has to be somebody there who sort of either nods his head, does not respond, but at least does that. And then if that happens, then you have a kind of a cultural complex growing in which is sort of an art worthwhile. And you can't change the environment. And I think a person like Nandalal was aware of it even from the beginning. So, when he writes the preface to the Shilpa Katha, he is talking about the kind of an artistic sensitivities of the normal tribal as against the insensitivity of the cultivated school or college goer.
আমরা চঞ্চল আমরা অদ্ভুত আমরা নূতন যৌবনের বিদ্যুৎ আমরা নূতন যৌবনের বিদ্যুৎ আমরা বেড়া ভাঙি আমরা অসুখ বনের রাখানি সাইরানি ঝঞ্ঝারো বন্ধন ছিন্ন করে দি আমরা বিদ্যুৎ আমরা চঞ্চল আমরা অদ্ভুত আমরা নূতন যৌবনের বিদ্যুৎ.
This way of looking at the world and artwork has also influenced the way he sees the world as an artist. He doesn't see what is perceived as a mere fact, but he always sees it as a metaphor into which the fact and the projection of the artist's thoughts are brought together. It's a fusion of these two aspects, and they are continuously shifting and they are taking new shapes as he paints. Images get transformed, facts that he sees are turned into metaphors, and they take new levels of meaning and expression.
When you talk about the mythology of perception, I think two figures. First, the figure of Inayat watching, which is all about perception. And perception across time, the physical process of aging, history, and cultures.
Right.
So all that comes into play with that figure at the hub.
You're right. Really speaking, I'm even aware of it. Right, the more and more I work now, I know that you have to be aware of this process all the time, otherwise you will lose hold on
And you'll be
your-
subsumed by it.
That's right.
That's a danger.
So it has to be all the time there. Of course, the Inayat Khan thing has some kind of a connection with my becoming older. And with the fact of my becoming older and the kind of idiotic delight I get by seeing the life that is. There are many things in life which you can criticize and you can sort of want to alter. But all the same, if you are thinking in terms of the real life, like the birds and beasts and the other things and the lawn and the
We
flowers.
accept it and we indulge in it even. Relish it.
I have sort of thought about it at all. I leave it to others to think about it. But the whole idea is that I know that I have been trying to think about what we call perception for a while. When we look at the world, and when we look at the world every morning, the world is a different world. Every day's image is a new image. Well, every day's image is not only a new image. Behind it there are these other images which make you sort of, let us say, unravel the world that you are in. So, there is a certain kind of an interaction between what you have seen and what you are seeing now, and a kind of a roots of various, how the visual images go through. That's how sometimes I think there is a kind of a mythology of seeing. I mean, an image slowly grows roots into other kinds of images. So, of late, I have been doing a kind of work which was highly mythological. Then, of course, this question of the struggle within man, the angel and the beast, or what you call the angel and the beast, or the angel become a beast to kill the beast, this struggle within has been foremost in whatever I do. There is fun in doing it because it all becomes laid out like a sort of a whole tapestry of conflict and resolution, conflict and resolution kind of thing. Probably it is something like how the bullfight became a kind of a theme for Picasso, and through which he tried to say various things, sometimes positive, sometimes negative.
The bull in man, the
That's
bull outside
right,
man,
that's right.
all that came into
So,
play.
similarly, yes, I do a series of drawings of either. In fact, many years ago I did something how the goddess was trying to learn to fight the demon.
Okay.
And making all kinds of circus-like poses, this sort of thing. Similarly, of late I have been doing a series of things related to our notions of avatars, from the fish to the turtle to the pig, and then I try to give various kinds of little implications in it whenever I can. But I enjoy doing this mixed kind of thing.
Manida, for the last few days we have been trailing you really, from Baroda to Shantiniketan. And you have been in a mad spurt of work, working in all the mediums and working prolifically. But normally, is there more of a method in the kind of work, in the way you work?
Well, really, very rarely do I work towards an exhibition. But I'm a compulsive doodler. I'm all the time busy doing something or the other on the sketchbook or the otherwise. Otherwise, I'm a doodler in the mind. And out of this, something or the other strikes me, then it comes out as a painting later. But like many people ask me, how many hours do you work during the day? And then when do you start working? Early in the morning? Now, well, that doesn't happen with me at all. It is true that every day after breakfast I sit in my studio and do something or the other. But I don't do it according to plan. But all the same, I keep busy throughout the whole day, either scribbling notes or doodling or painting. And most of the things that interest me are the little things I see around, sort of thing. And when I play around, I want to do all kinds of things, some of them serious, some of them non-serious. So I enjoy sort of doing those sort of light-hearted illustrations for children's books, sometimes write even the text for them. And that is a certain level of art. That is something I do not despise doing. In fact, I have heard that it seems Gandhi used to say that don't look down upon just spinning as a sort of a mechanical exercise. It does enormous things to your way of thinking. Maybe it did, but then if you are making things with your hands, which are beautiful, which are functional in a beautiful way, then of course you are doing much more. But then occasionally there are things which are happening in the world which also sort of make me do things. In fact, sometimes a certain issue sort of hits me hard, then of course I react to it quite directly. In fact, I was very much upset by the various violent happenings in different parts of the country, and occasionally I did. Almost every few days, we get the distressing news of such mindless violence from time to time. So, when I got news of the Malegaon violence some time back, it sort of prompted me to write a little poem on that. Well, if you can call it a poem. You do not have to go to anatomy rooms to see dismembered bodies. You can see them on the street. Eyes blown out of sockets, faces ripped apart, torsos crushed and mangled, torn limbs strewn around like playthings in the pathways for the stray dogs to tug and tear. Streets are now open playfields for wild men on the prowl, masked out of identity with black dress and hood and gloves, seeking to blast the bodies of unwarned fellow beings. To assert a waning manhood, to express an inner hurt, to avenge an ancient grievance or serve a faceless god made out of stone or timber or a non-material myth born out of countless stories that spoof from many mouths, where each new wash of spittle reshapes the previous tale, painting in shadow patches that lead one's mind astray, clouded with dark suspicions, seeded with bars of hate, streets no more ring with laughter. Doors stare like vacant eyes, hold whispers in the shaded corners and veils in the corridors. The veils are warped with anger. Tears hiss like molten lead. The heart's once smiling garden is a patch of deadened earth, spewing new bugs of hatred in each human beast or thing, cramping their growth and action, shrinking their inner selves. Trees chop the sky like hatchets, grass flares like blown fire, birds slash the air with curses, beasts glare with gory eyes, and each man sees his neighbor, a monster in human dress.
Mari palare palare o kabe dihi bugolai malare malare o kabe ai be mari palare palare o kabe dihi bugolai malare malare mone janai kunu pap bondhu mone janai kunu pap তোর পিরিতে দিবানিসি থাকে আমার মনটা দাসি প্রেমের জ্বালা বড় জ্বালা রে কবে কবে আইবে পালা রে ও কবে দিবু গলাই মালা রে
If you want to keep this place, the campus beautiful and clean, and put it as their responsibility, they will learn how to make it. I feel quite uneasy to stand before you and talk on the cultural unity of India after the highly learned and informed presentation of the last 1 hour. I am an artist, not a scholar. So what I shall say here should be considered a layman's reaction to the amazing paradox that our country's cultural scene is, balancing a chaotic diversity on one side with an inner core of continuity on the other. What we call culture is on one side the life pattern and its wherewithal of a group of human beings that results from their encounter with an environment, and on the other the notions they derive from this encounter regarding their origin, antecedents, growth, evolution, and destiny.